Hey everyone, and welcome to the last episode of We Need to Talk Season 5. What an incredible season this has been, filled with so many meaningful conversations. I had the pleasure of meeting my guests today when I was a guest on their podcast, Yes, Jesus, where I talked about allyship and my journey as a progressive Christian. But now I get to be behind the table, so to speak, and find out more about their journey and their story. Joining me today are host and advocate Azariah Southworth and actor and stand-up comic Daniel Franzese. Azariah and Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Of course. I'm excited to chat with you. You had a blast on your podcast, and I love the space that you are creating for the LGBTQ community, specifically with the conversations that you're having surrounding faith and identity. But before we even get to talking about your podcast, I want to talk about your individual stories and journeys. So, Azariah, I'm going to start with you. And I know you had mentioned that you grew up in Indiana, which I'm so interested to hear what that experience was like in terms of your exposure to religion and Christianity within that scope, because we know it's a very conservative, more red-leaning state. So what was your experience like?
Very much so. So the region of Indiana I grew up in is the northeast corner. So I grew up in a tri-state area near Michigan, Ohio. The Amish have a big influence in the culture here, as well as the Catholic Church. There's a big diocese nearby in Fort Wayne. So it's a very Puritan heavy culture. A lot of emphasis on purity and abstinence and trying to perfect your walk with Christ. So the tradition I grew up in was Pentecostal charismatic. My grandpa started the first Pentecostal church in Kalamazoo, Michigan back in the day. And so that has influenced my faith experience growing up a lot. So I grew up with women pastors, which was probably about as liberal as we got. So I've never questioned a woman in authority, and I'm very grateful for that experience.
Yeah.
This region of Indiana has that heavy emphasis on purity, I would say, just because of the conservative religious influences that dominate this area.
And Danny, what was your experience growing up and your exposure to Christianity and religion?
Religion's always been and Christianity's always been a very important part of my life, because it was a very important part of my parents' identity around the time that I was born. My grandparents were Italian immigrants, and my parents converted from Catholicism to born-again Christianity right before I was born, and it severed the family. It like made a big deal for everyone. So my parents, I was supposed to be named Antonio after my grandfather, because you always name the oldest after the father in Italian tradition. But they named me Daniel without a middle name, because Daniel means God is my judge. So I've traveled my whole life with God as my judge really close to my chest, and I grew up really close to God. And even though I did have a lot of trouble being queer and figuring that out, I had a very happy Christian household childhood, Italian American Brooklyn Christian Italian household. But I didn't, but it wasn't until I got older that I sort of, struggled a little bit more. So I grew up kind of in Pentecostal, born again, missionary churches, sort of, so to speak. And then it kind of dabbled, especially towards college, a little more into like Southern Baptist, because that's what was around, Southern Baptist and even Methodist and Lutheran. But I always felt very non-denominational myself. I feel like I have a special relationship with God. And so now I don't really identify to a full denomination, but all the ones I mentioned are sort of the places I'm the most comfortable.
Yeah. So when you came into your true identity, what was the response for the people around you that you grew up in the church with?
Well, it's funny because, both Azariah and I are, we speak about it often. We're both survivors of conversion therapy, and both in very different ways. He was forced into it, and I was willingly putting myself into it without anyone else knowing. I was trying to find a way out, and I think both of them show how both of them are very damaging ways, process. It's like an outdated, never worked before, antiquated, like archaic, barbaric, evil way to try to infiltrate someone's mind and make them feel the way you're thinking. It's brainwashing. And I think the biggest issue was not really with how everybody accepted me, and more with how I accepted myself. I imagine today's youth, and I see them so blazingly free, a lot of them, and not everyone, obviously, but you see a great deal of them, especially in media nowadays, being able to be themselves and have storylines. And I do wonder what it would be like if I, at 14 or 15, was comfortable with who I was. I do think in my heart of hearts, everybody that was around me would have been accepting and loving. And had they had not, all of my family and the people around me who were accepting and loving would have told them all to, go hit the road. But I just wasn't comfortable in myself. And that just caused so many rifts. I felt like every problem I had was because of it. I had like a chip on my shoulder. And I did have a thing of fearing of disappointing my family, and fear of like not living up to the ideals of what I was expected to with my masculinity. I didn't know how to, embrace the feminine qualities that I have, and try to feign and fake other levels of masculinity. To me, that always seemed harsh and insensitive, and not a person I wanted to be anyway. But I trying to create that to sort of just feel safe is very, you're mixing all kinds of cocktails of emotion and of hormonal balance that honestly aren't meant to be mixed together. So I think I have a hard time going back and looking at everyone and saying, would they have felt different, or would my dad have cared if I couldn't throw a barlow, whatever? I don't know, because I cared and it bothered me so much. And I do think that was directly related to religious trauma. I do think that was I loved Christ so much that everybody around, everything that I ever heard from someone who I valued their opinion on God had a negative connotation. Even if I had family members who were gay and my family accepted them and loved them, and they did. I had elderly gay uncles as an example. I had lesbian cousins, and they were fine. They were welcome in the family. Like, everything was great. It still felt like a stain on my soul, like something that I couldn't continue to do whatever I want, So to me, that's why the message that Azariah and I try, in the space we try to create, is so important, because I said, well, I forced myself into asexuality, and like by romanticism in a way. I forced myself to be asexual, but be biromantic. Like, I found everything I could find in a woman that I could love, and I tried to love it and cherish it and treat it like a ritual, the way God wanted me to a wife. But it still never had the electricity to make it all go.
Oh, I can't even imagine how it must feel to have those feelings inside of you. And it's just, I'm like, as I'm listening to you, it breaks my heart, so to speak, that you even had to go through that. But what I think is beautiful about both of your journeys, to be honest, and especially what you're doing with your podcast, is that, and I say this often in my podcast, is that you became the thing that you didn't have. And you are being the person for that younger generation that, they're looking at you and like, it's okay to be who I am. It's okay to be me, because you didn't have that growing up, And so I love that you guys are doing that specifically with your podcast. So even not being a member of the LGBTQ community, I'm just saying thank you to you, because you probably are saving a lot of lives by just being authentic in who you are and telling people, hey, God made you the way that you are. Love yourself, and he loves you as well. So I think it's beautiful that you're doing that. And I really appreciate you sharing your stories.
I really think the same for you, though. I want to give you your flowers real quick too. No, because it takes an ally, an ally with maybe no skin in the game to have to feel like I am on your side. And that's what we needed the most. So we the same way, I thank you. It's one of the reasons Azariah and I are so excited to do this show, because we really appreciate the message that you're sending out. Your audience, I always say we're not trying to reach we're trying to find people who might not hear this story, or might not even know this perspective, and might not even be gay themselves, that want to be an ally and want to help and want to expand their mind on Christ, because there's so much to God. There's so much. Like, we can't take a narrow point of view that's been decided by a committee. We have to be able to wonder and feel it out.
Absolutely. And I love that you said that, because I do feel that people have a very reductive view of what God is capable of doing. And that has always frustrated me. It's like, you're limiting God so much, you know? So I love that you said that. Azariah, I'm going to jump to you really quickly because I would love to know what your experience was like with conversion therapy as well. And just kind of throwing this in the mix, you know, I recently, and I talked about this before on an earlier episode of my podcast, watched the documentary Pray Away. And I had to pause it often because I was getting angry. So I can't even imagine how triggering it might have been for somebody that actually went through that process and had that kind of religious trauma inflicted upon them. So I would, as much as you feel comfortable, please share your experience so people can understand what conversion therapy really does to a person.
Oh boy, honey, buckle up. Because repression will work a wonder. And it did on me. When I was 13, my parents suspected that I had gay tendencies. I mean, if making out with my childhood crush between Sunday services wasn't enough for them, then at 13 they knew. And they went to our pastor at the time and, you know, wanted her to have a conversation with me. And so they planned this meeting. They set up this meeting with her after a Sunday evening service, because we were a go to church Sunday morning, Sunday evening family. And so it was after Sunday evening service, and it was pitched to me in a way that I thought she wanted to impart some wisdom to me, or, you know, like I thought it was like special one-on-one time with Pastor. I was really excited. And when I went in her office, she sat me down and she told me of the story that she saw on the news about a man who was molested. And when he grew up, he ended up molesting other children. And she looked at me and she said, "Azariah, my eyes are on fire." And growing up in a Pentecostal, you know, environment, you that kind of lingo, like I interpreted that as, I can see right through you and I know that you're a homosexual, you know? So she framed the story as if this happens to all homosexuals, right? And if you don't confess to me, this is my impression, what I took away from it, is that you will become like this man, that you were probably molested and that you will grow up to do the same thing. And I knew that that's not who I was and that's not what I wanted. But I knew that I was attracted to the same sex because 98 Degrees was performing in Fort Wayne that night. And I had a huge crush on Nick Lachey. So
who didn't, though? Who didn't? Let's be honest. Who didn't, right?
I mean, he was kind of young.
If God delivered me of anything, it was my crush on Nick Lachey. So I confessed out loud for the first time to her that I was gay, and I broke down in tears, and it was very emotional. And she came and knelt down beside me and started to cast the demons of homosexuality out of me, and that continued once a week for the next 5 years. And I would have to confess my thoughts to her when I had impure thoughts, and at one point wore a rubber band around my wrist to stop myself whenever I had an impure thought. And so that taught me how to hide. It taught me how to lie and to not really be able to fully show up and be myself in any situation, circumstance, not feel safe to do that. And so a story that I often tell, and it's not a story that I'm proud of, but conversion therapy started at 13, and at the age of 14, I started breaking into homes, and it's because it was my way of trying to find what I couldn't have, and I ended up stealing a bunch of dildos. Okay, that's the story. I was trying to be vague, but let's just come out of the bag with it, okay?
I don't know the whole story, but kudos.
I wasn't prepared, and I'm obsessed.
Is anybody ready? Is anybody really ready?
How do you tell this story? I don't know. I'm still figuring it out.
I just love that, like, of anything that you could have taken jewelry, you could have taken like DVDs probably at the time. You're like, no, This is what I want. I love it.
This is what I want.
You were committed.
There's no Columbia House for dildos. You gotta get them where you gotta get them.
Oh, that's great.
Oh my goodness.
I couldn't, this is what happens when you're not allowed to go to sex ed, when your parents write a note exempting you from sex ed. This is what happens when you are not allowed the freedom or the opportunities to talk about what's going on in your body during puberty and to help you understand the feelings and the urges that you have and how to manage them, and that's what I didn't have. And so when you don't have that, guess what? You'll grow up and you're breaking homes and still dildos. So it came out sideways for me. And so that just added to the shame and more repression. And, I needed to commit further to my conversion therapy. And that's kind of my experience with it. Overall, all it taught me was shame and repression and to lie and secrecy. And as a 35-year-old, I'm still learning how to unpack that and undo that, how can I really show it more authentically in this space, in this environment?
We touched on it earlier. We are the generation of trailblazers. We didn't have like a generation before us necessarily talking at all about this movement in the way that we are now and as deep as we are now. And the people who were willing to, a lot of them died in the AIDS crisis. So like us, we lost it. So we're speaking double. We're double speaking for everyone who can hear. Like we got to say it twice. We got to say it the same story in every podcast. It's whatever we can do to get this message out there, so we can start educating. This has been this big debate since the FDA came up about poppers, talking about poppers, which is an inhalant drug that's very popular in gay culture. It's pretty much you can get over the counter, but it aids. It's a sexual aid. It helps you relax your muscles, all of them, in order to be able to complete certain sex acts, right? So this is something that we don't know what it does to us. I mean, it was a prescribed drug like in the 1800s, and somewhere in the 60s it started getting used in discos, and who knows what happens, but the FDA is warning not to use it, and they're not saying anything new. They're saying the same thing they've always said about it with no research. There's no research on gay sex. There's such little comprehensive sexual education for minors to even understand how some of this stuff even works. So where do we go to learn it? Like, I may not have broken into people's homes, but I did put myself in a lot of dangerous situations, risky behavior and places I shouldn't have been, to try to learn what was going on or figure out what was going on, places I wish I never went, and tried drugs that I wouldn't have tried maybe, or did things that I wouldn't do to try to feel something or mask something or feel comfortable with who I was, And I honestly think that I thank the Lord that I had God the whole journey, because without Father, Son, Holy Spirit, there would be no Danny, really. And so I fear for the young kid out there who not only maybe not know about this, because it's really not like a preachy vibe, but it's like the ones who knew and walked away, like who turned their back on God because somebody told them God was turning their back on them. Because when you really know the glory of God and then you turn your back on it, it's so sad. And I tell these kids all the time, my mom said it in a great way, like, what's your most favorite thing in the world? Like, if someone walked up to you right now and tried to take your Louis Vuitton or try to take your puppy, would you let them? No, but how easy you give up your God. And it's kind of like a place where we, Azariah and I, we're really close, and we it's been tough since COVID, but normally we hang out all the time, like whenever we want, and so it's kind of like, we were talking about stuff like this all the time. This is what the conversations we were having, we prayed before dinner and had these conversations, and just were like, we need to just get this message out there. Like, other people need to hear it. And so, living in the time of trailblazers, that's our job. That's why, we have to get this message out there, because it may not be about us. It may not be, you said be the person that you didn't have. Like, that's what it's really all about, because, people need to hear this message and just know that God loves you no matter what. Like, literally, like, the essence of God is God loves you, and that you're fearfully and wonderfully made. And for anyone that denies that, you're just a lukewarm ass Christian.
But real talk. But the interesting thing that you said, and is that a lot of people, and because of the trauma that they endure and the experiences they have with people, they end up walking away from God. But neither of you chose to do that. So when did you get to that point where you realized, you know what? God loves me. He made me this way. and I'm happy with who I am. Like, when did you know that everything that you had been taught about homosexuality, the LGBTQ community, was wrong and God loved you?
For me, I think it was simple math. It was like 1 + 1 = 2. Like, it was like, God is perfect. It makes perfect things. And like, you know, I know when I'm not being perfect, and I know when I'm doing something. I have discernment. I know when I'm sinning. We all have sin. So if we all have sin and Jesus died for our sins, and so we have a great equalizer, okay? What's left is just a human being. I'm being so judged by the Christian community by my sin, and I'm looking at these people like, I know you're cheating on your wife. Like, who are you pointing at? Like, you know what I mean? Like, oh, you're a missionary? Yeah, and you just went to Belize and magically came back with a wife who doesn't really speak English, and you're really ugly. How'd that happen? Like, you're still doing some shady stuff.
Yeah.
So, you know, when someone points at you, they get the other fingers pointing back at themselves. And honestly, I've always just come, like, it really is my mother who gave me God as my judge, as my weapon. Because really, like, if God's okay with what I'm doing, if I'm doing things that have love and consent and respect and, you know, even lust and connection and on a good, nice and spiritual plane, like, then I don't really see how you can hold me up to somebody who is, you know, doing all their things. Like, I'm not trying to sin. I'm not trying to judge everybody else's sin. I don't yuck anybody's yum. I'm not a sin counter. That is not my purpose on this earth.
Right.
It's mine.
So it's Azariah, and Judge Judy and RuPaul got a pencil and paper. Daniel, that's 7,642 blowjobs.
That was an oddly specific number, as if you've already said that before.
No. I honestly, like, I'm not trying to like downplay my lifestyle, but I wish. line them up. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just trying. See, but here's another thing. The off-color humor thing, right? Making jokes about blowjobs. People get so uptight. They get so wrapped up in all of this stuff. Like, I'm laughing my ass off about Lil Nas X right now and how people are so wrapped up about him.
Yes.
But the whole point, the whole thing, the satanic thing. First of all, I have an aversion to satanic imagery. I don't like it. Like, honestly, and I'll say it straight right now, if a dude comes at me and he's got like a pentagram necklace on me and he's trying to hit on me in a club, it ain't happening. Like, that's just
like, no.
That's just, yeah. I'm like,
right.
I'm like, you have a pentagram tattoo. Great. My mom will love that. No, it's just not. I don't care how cute. I don't care how cute you are. I can't even sleep with you. Like, it's not it. You know.
Right.
That's just not. It just doesn't fit. But that whole thing, what he did there, it took me a second to realize how he's just basically told by Christians all the time, you know, especially within his own music community. He literally, instead of saying, okay, I go to hell, so he CGIs a 500-foot stripper pole, slides down, lap dances on the devil, snaps his neck and takes his place. That's funny. Like, and I know that the iconography was gross and the blood in the shoe was gross and all that stuff is gross, but we're giving it so much power. You're giving like a red-faced horned devil so much power. You can't give power to an icon. You have the adversary is way more advanced and sneaky and prettier than that. And you know, a good example is I never watched the movie Hellboy because I was like, it looks like it's called Hellboy and it's got a big demon. But my sister liked it and she's like way more Bible thumper than I am. And I'm like, what the heck? Like, I was like, let me like check this out. And I watched it and it was hilarious and heartwarming. And Hellboy's actually like a really sweet man who's like trying to figure out like his way through so I judge the book by its cover, and it's the same way it's the same way the president of Walsh University is judging his gay students by the cover. It's the same way Azariah and I get called out for having titles like can you thank God? Can you thank God? But you know, like people are like get all around, but you know what? You're judging us, and you don't realize there's a praise report and a prayer request and scripture in that message, and there's a prayer in that message, and sometimes we got to put stuff in a candy wrapper to feed it to them. Because some of these people are the people we're preaching to the people who have been told that they have nothing, that there's no more place for them. So they see something like that, and that's a familiarity. It's a funny joke. It's like a lighthearted. Me joking about blowjobs is not going to send me to hell. That was like I couldn't practice my art. I couldn't be my person in front of myself and my family because I thought that joking about blowjobs was going to send me to hell. And it's like, so the same message is still being spewed at me. I laugh. It's laughable. It's like me having a big iron shield made by God. And, you know, the devil's got like one of those little like red rubber, like suction cup darts, like, and it's like, I'm laughing like when they come at me, because what we're doing here is so important. Azzy and I received messages from the Philippines and from the Appalachian Mountains and from Paris and from Tokyo and just people all over who just needed someone to say, you can be gay and love God.
So important. So important. And Azariah, what about you?
The moment that comes to my mind is when I realized that I serve Jesus because I love Jesus. You know, like I follow the message of Christ because I'm compelled by the life and example that he lived. And not because I'm trying to, not to avoid hell. And I understood that so often the reason growing up, the reason I did what I did, and I was very zealous. Even Christian radio DJs were telling me, you're very zealous, you know, because it's like Christian radio DJ has to tell you that you're pretty zealous. But it was because I feared going to hell, you know, and that was my motivation. But I was able to switch to love, and like as the Course in Miracles says, the only true miracle that can happen is the conversion from fear to love. And so when my miracle happened is when I was able to learn to love myself, accept myself, debunk the false theology that says LGBTQ people are a sin and going to hell, you know, and to understand the Bible from a historical, critical point of view and approach the interpretation from that aspect instead of a literal point of view, which is all that I knew. So yeah, making that switch of like, I follow Christ because I believe in the example and the message that he gave to us, was when I could just give the big middle finger to all of the naysayers out there and the emails that I would get from people from my church that would say, you know, God still loves you. You can still come back, you know. Even today I got one, you know. So that conversion experience for me from fear to love and understanding that I follow Christ because of the example that he led was my moment.
That's huge. I love that, to transition from fear to love. I think that that's a big, big statement. A question that I have for you, for both of you, when people are trying to kind of get into this whole deconstruction movement that's happening, and it's been big, of people really kind of looking at what they've been taught their whole lives and saying like, wait a minute, hold up. Why, you know, where would you suggest that they start if they're really trying to kind of lean more into this progressive Christian movement that's happening of love and acceptance?
By listening to Yass, Jesus. No.
That's a great suggestion, though, for sure.
I mean, we know our favorite story. Like, for us, when it comes to the LGBTQ experience, I always love to start with David and Jonathan in 1 Samuel, because, like, I don't think anyone who's gay would pick up on this perspective unless they're really looking. But once you get it, it's like so different. You know, David and Jonathan reads as a gay love story to me, plain and simple, 100% crystal clear in the Bible. And I think that that was a very freeing notion to me. You know, it's always been served to us as, you know, best friends, or I've seen it at weddings as between the best man, or, you know, these kind of covenants of love. But when you read them in the context of the story, it's so compelling and undeniable. I think that's an amazing place to start for at least the LGBTQ experience. But there's a lot of things. I mean, for me, also, as he talk about Joseph and his dream coat of many colors, because you know, like Joseph's coat in the story is written from 46 AD as Ketenet Pasim, which is not a coat. It only appears one other time in the Bible as a virginal dress that a princess wears on her wedding day. So Jacob bought Joseph a princess dress, which is why he got beat up and why they ripped it up and put blood on it and everything else. Joseph was potentially genderqueer or trans or gay or just something, or just even wore women's clothing. And I think that was the problem for everyone. Peter Santiscano said something where he was like, to not even tell that part of the story is to do a disservice to the Bible. Like, even if you don't believe it, pastors, preachers, priests should say, you know, we don't believe this, but some say Joseph was genderqueer. That might be something for someone in that, you know, from that perspective. To not even say that part is really doing a disservice to the Bible when the direct translation is a princess dress.
Well, to do that is kind of common practice in America to omit actual parts of history.
I think for me, with Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter movement, the facts that were coming my way, learning about affluent Black New York that was destroyed for Central Park, learning about George Washington's teeth and the actuality of that, changed my life forever.
Yeah.
Because why even say they were wooden teeth? Why even tell me something? Why have me in elementary school making like a little thing where I'm tasting fake wood? Like, why have me do something that is so perpetuating lies?
Yes.
And that really got me deeper into checking out what my own queer history meant. Because fighting along the lines for Black Lives Matter, queer people need to go and say, hey, what about us too? Like, we need to look into our stuff. They've been lying about us too.
Yes.
And without critical race theory, without comprehensive sexual education and queer history, no one's going to know this stuff. And so that's why, we have to find different ways. We have to find ways to express it in art, or sneaky slide it into my stand-up, or someone can, make a parody song one day, or we could just do a podcast and drop some knowledge on the different audience. But the whole point is we have to keep talking about it, because this revisionist history thing that they all like to do, I mean, just coloring books of white Jesus just isn't going to do it for me anymore. Yep. I have to, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit transcend color, race, and gender, and all of that stuff. And I need to see the light, and I have to look deeper for that. And I think that if anybody is even curious of even seeing what it's like to feel that feeling, it's literally like the best thing in the world. It comes above anything. And so it's like, you have to, start anywhere is my advice. But just start looking and wondering, because it's right in front of you. And I don't want to take too much of the mic, Azzy, but I'm so compelled right now, because I feel like I'm a little on fire for the Lord to tell this other little quick story. But the way that an example of like proof of God for me was I was in Louisiana. God bless them right now, but I was in Louisiana filming a movie, and I was at a Walmart, and I was with some other actors, and we were all acting fool, and we were going into Walmart and buying a bunch of like Christmas lights to decorate our house and have a little party. And we're coming out, and there's like a quote unquote crazy lady in the parking lot, and she says something to my friend, and he goes, yeah, and he went in the car, and it made me laugh the way he like kind of dismissed her. And she came around to my car, and she was like, like saying something, and I went, yeah. I just mimicked his yeah, and we all were kind of like laughing. And she goes, you know what I'm talking about? I'm like, no, I don't. And I'm like putting the packages in the car. She's like, I'm talking about God. And I vow to myself that I would never, it doesn't matter what scenario it is, I'll never deny God. That's just something that won't happen. Yeah. And so she's like, I'm talking about God. And I was like, yes, I do know what you're talking about. And she's like, God's like a new car. And I'm like, you lost me there. She's like, well, did you ever get she's like, did you ever get a new car? And I said, yeah. And she goes, well, did you notice the car before you got it? She's like, and then once you get it, you notice it everywhere. You go, oh, there it is on the corner. The same car is there. It is in red. She goes, oh, there it is over here. That car was always there, but you were enlightened to it. She's like, and when you open your eyes and your heart, and you get enlightened to God, God is everywhere, and he was there all the time, and you just were blind. That's why, so that, to me, that is... You
got a whole sermon in a parking lot.
I did. Maybe she was an angel. Maybe that's what I needed to hear at that time in my life. Yeah. When I was struggling with a lot of things I was struggling with, but to me, that was another, like Oprah says, like an aha moment. Like, it was another time that I just kind of was like, God exists. Like, how could you... I mean, everybody else are going to go like have this, karaoke party, and I'm just sitting there thinking about God,
Yeah. Azariah, I'm going to actually direct a different question to you. Why do you think now there is so much emphasis on kind of deconstructing and trying to be an ally, trying to be an advocate, trying to focus on social justice, as opposed to, we look in the past? I think it's just like a huge movement now, but also just specifically within progressive Christianity. Why do you think that it's kind of being pushed to the forefront now?
It seems that social media would definitely play a role in that, because we can find our communities through the hashtags, through the algorithms, and exchange ideas and expound on that. Now, it really all started with liberation theology, it seems like. And that isn't too old of a theology, and I think it's just compounding with that and the access to information. I mean, that's from my vantage point. That's what I suspect.
I think that's great. I agree.
Because once you can grasp onto the liberation theology and understand that this, it came to set you free and free indeed, you know, like you don't want to go back. You can't go back, you know, and you want to share that because that is the good news.
Absolutely.
And so, and I also think that with collaboration of other communities, other causes, you know, it builds on that as well. You know, there's more support, more infrastructure to get the word out and the message out. So I think from my vantage point, that's what I can see.
Yeah, I think access to information is a huge thing because it's also kind of like once you are privy to something and you know something, you can't ignore it, you know? So like once you know certain stories in the Bible are actually this way, you're like, well, how can I ignore that? So let me go a little deeper, a little further. Once you know actual American history, you can't ignore it. You have to continue to learn and to know more because then ignorance, you know, really is bliss because you don't want to have to acknowledge the things that it's you know, it's heartbreaking. I think that's why people, when you talk about critical race theory, when you mention that, Danny, like nobody wants to hear the truth about America because they've been fed this narrative of the American dream and, you know, America being this perfect country. And America is a great country, right? But when you're challenging that narrative with actual facts, people think that their narrative is the facts, but it's not. You're like, no, this is actually what it is.
Do you remember American Tail, the cartoon American Tail?
I do. Fievel, right?
With the little Fievel, the little mouse. He comes from like Russia, like as an immigrant mouse.
Yeah.
There was a song in that where it was like, there are no cats in America and the streets are paved with cheese. You know, and like they're all the rats are like so excited. They're like, so set your mind at ease. And I was like, why do they think America's like this? And it really informed me about how my immigrant grandparents must have felt coming here thinking that like everything's for you. And then, you know, being slapped in the face with like a last name change or having to like all of a sudden, you know, work on the docks and figure out how to do that when you were a farmer and all of these other things that they were faced with, you know. And I know that it's so funny for the rats because they get there and then they're in New York City and there's just like street cats everywhere trying to eat them for the rest of the movie. So it's like it kind of sit with me early realizing like maybe something's a little off here, you know. I think the reason that everybody's like, especially now, like I feel like it's in the past few years that this fuse is lit. And when that movie 1946 comes out, I really think that's going to make a big thing. It's going to take a while to get out there to the people that aren't going to rush out and see it. But I think that's really it's putting information out there. I think the reason we're all in this big panic right now in the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, this queer uprising, all of this is happening. I think it's a direct combination of the information age of having all the information directly at our fingertips, and then a country's reaction, both good and bad, to having a black queer loving president. I think that like they weren't ready for that, and then everyone could share how much they either were or weren't ready for it, and then it explodes. You know, I mean, it was just like, and then, you know, coming out of the administration, I mean, you know, we're never in like, since Obama, I haven't really felt like we've been in like the most amazing hands, and there's mistakes that now we found out that Obama made, and everybody makes mistakes. But like, I feel like moving forward and being progressive and going ahead, we can't let the country get that divided again, no matter who's in charge. We saw what the outcome of that is. And, you know, even comedy is so like, I was just thinking, you know, even something like we're learning now not to use African American vernacular, you know, and making like jokes or things like that, or you know, or maybe like saying that's so gay, like we're culturally learning like things that are peeling off, that eventually a lot of comedy is suffering because the people are too afraid to like make that step to be irreverent and everything like that. And I think speaking with a lot of people that are boomers or speaking with a lot of people that are in comedy in general, I think a lot of people are like really frustrated with that kind of aspect, that people are so sensitive right now that you literally can't do anything. You know, and I think it's going to take a chance for everybody to stand up. It's kind of like the world, or the country especially, but the world is having like a big town hall meeting, and we're kind of saying these are the things we haven't been okay with all of this time, you know. And you know, it's confusing for for a lot of people how that works. Because some people, I always think Mexicans and Italians, we love, like, those two cultures especially love being made fun of. They're like, put a sombrero on a bean and sell me a burrito, and like Italians are like the same thing. I saw this thing driving down the street the other day that said Luigi's Italian Ice. That had this guy with like Guido's Italian Ice. That had this guy's like crazy mustache and these zany eyes. And I'm like, no, but you can never do that at a Chinese food restaurant now or something, but but I don't know how many Italian guys today in today's world are being punched in the face at a word like that. And I think that's where we have to think when violence is attached to some of that stuff. It takes the humor out for me. It's not okay for just some people to laugh at it anymore. And until we can kind of come to a place where either we're like the most crazy mixed melting pot and it doesn't matter anymore, which is really where we're headed, or it gets to the point where everybody can learn like how to treat each other, and then it's okay to make fun of everyone again because we're all in on the joke instead of being the butt of the joke. I don't know how long it's going to take for comedy to change, but I really also don't think it's going to be that long, because the way eventually, Caitlyn Jenner is a great example when I talk about this, because when Caitlyn Jenner came out as trans and was on the cover of Vanity Fair, it was like earth shattered. Like there isn't a person in this world who didn't know who Bruce Jenner was, and now there isn't a person who doesn't know who Caitlyn Jenner is. Right. And it was like, it got down to the nursing homes. They talked about it, and I think that was, even though Caitlyn Jenner is a problematic hero, in a way, like, I do a person, forget hero, but person, a problematic person. Like, I think that she was a trailblazer in so many ways and so brave to do what she did to came out. But then that very Halloween, the number one Halloween costume was to wear a white dress with a sash and say, I'm Caitlyn, and for like frat dudes to dress up like Caitlyn Jenner. And everybody thought that was funny. Like everyone was dressing like her, and they were like, that's disgusting and so transphobic to do something like that. And I was like, no, because you need to be the joke before you get woke. Like you need to be the butt of the joke. Like if I put a gay neighbor in a movie that and you're like, hey, Mr. Wilson, and he's like, hey, girl, like we might all giggle right now, but then the joke's already been in the movie, so they're not going to put it in another movie because it wouldn't be funny anymore. And 10 years after that movie's 10 years old, then pretty soon your neighbor could be like, hey, girl, and you just walk down the street. So it's like, we can't also fight against the comedy aspect of it all, or like being used as like a, because I feel like African-American people and queer people fall into that same spectrum of like take our stuff and then use it,
100%.
But it's almost like that, but that's how they get used to us. Like that's how we are getting into people's homes, like, and I think it's part of the healing process. I think we're stuck here. We have like a blood clot. Like we're kind of stuck somewhere in our country, and it will heal or it will flow again or whatever the situation is, but it's not going to stay the way it is right now where everyone's sensitive. It can't. It literally can't. We have no place to go from there, And I think we lost a lot in comedy with that, especially being able to like make like Living Color was excellent, and it was excellent because nobody was spared, and I think that is the kind of thing that we need again, but it's just not going to happen.
That's the only All Lives Matter I can get on board with.
Also, all of lives matter. Like I'm Italian. My grandparents came here in like the early 1900s. I wasn't here for any of this shit. You know what I mean? Like there's just no different. Like we need to learn about everybody. Like this. Like too much too much judging books by their cover going on right now.
Well, before we wrap up, I do want to talk about your podcast. And so, Azariah, how did the podcast come to be, and how did you two meet? First, let's start there. How did you two meet, and how did you decide to create this podcast that is just changing lives and is so important for the LGBTQIA community?
It was a dark alley, really, and
oh my God!
I just happened to have $17, which is his hourly rate.
No, I met Danny because I went to one of his shows, and I just we had a mutual friend, and I went up to and introduced myself afterwards, and he thought I was cute, and so we went out for drinks afterwards, and we just connected over drinks at this great little queer bar in Silver Lake called Akbar, and we shared our religious upbringing, our conversion therapy stories, that night, and we just kept hanging out, and these conversations just kept continued. And with my background in television and his his background as well. We wanted to bring something out to the forefront that people can listen to, consume, hear a prayer, have some funny, irreverent conversations around faith and sexuality, because we were having them. So, but yeah, that's kind of how we met and how it started.
I love it. I love it. And where can everybody listen to your podcast?
Apple, iTunes. I don't get these names right. Apple Podcasts is what it's called, right?
They keep changing it. So don't, like, it wasn't Apple Podcast before. It was just iTunes, and now it's Apple Pod. Yeah, you're fine. I totally am with you on that one.
It's pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
But if you are listening on Apple, we'd appreciate a 5-star review. Thank you.
Yes, please, honey. She needs to eat.
Yeah, but you can get us at yassjesuspod.com or at yassjesuspod on Instagram.
Amazing. Yes. And what are your individual social media handles where they can follow you and keep up with you as well?
I'm at Religious Trade because you can find me in an alley for $17 now. Preaching the gospel.
That's $18. There will be glory, but there also might be a hole. We won't talk about that. I am What's Up Danny on Instagram, Twitter, Tumblr, blackpeoplemeet.com, JDate, Farmers Only, and Venmo, and anywhere else.
You're done.
That list, I can't. Oh, you both are amazing. I'm so glad that you were able to just chat with me for a little bit. Thank you for what you're doing and for the space that you're creating. And I hope to meet you both in person once we get out of this pandemic. But thank you so much for lending your voices to this conversation. And to the listeners, thank you so much for an incredible season of We Need to Talk. We will be back in January of next year, but don't go too far because we have some great mini series coming up in October and November. We'll talk to you real soon. Take care.